So welcome to class number 2 of the Art of Being Smart program. Today's class is actually quite interesting because we're going to be looking at predominantly reasons why hardworking students actually are not able to get the results that they want. And in the past, we've always been taught, at least I was taught, and a lot of people I know have always been taught that, you know, if you study and you work hard enough, then you'll be successful. So in my opinion, that's true, but it's also part of the equation. So we're actually going to look at reasons why a lot of hardworking students may not still get the results that they want. Okay, and this is quite interesting because if you are a student that is, you know, putting a lot of time and effort and you're still not getting the results that you want, you're going to get a lot of insight in terms of why this could be happening for you. Okay, so let's get started, and I think this is going to be a very informative class for you today. So here's our agenda. We're going to look at the difference between hardworking students who get average to low grades versus top students who easily get the best grades. Okay, and the key component here is that it's usually not how hard they work. Now, I've put in parentheses here that it's an unlearning concept. So as we go through this material, there's going to be a few concepts that we'll have to actually unlearn. And the reason I'm actually talking about this unlearning process here is because the traditional way that most of us have been taught in terms of being successful academically is actually not the best way to do so. So you're going to be unlearning a lot of concepts. So it might be a little bit weird, it might be a little bit different sometimes because for you, because you're like, well, I was taught to do this, now I'm taught to do something different. And so what I'd ask you to do is actually look at the results that you're currently getting with the way you've already been taught. And if those results are working for you, then don't unlearn or don't change anything. But if those results are not working for you, then I would consider unlearning that concept, letting that go and adopt a new concept, okay, a new way of doing things. And it's very important to understand that traditionally, the approach to succeeding, whether it's school or in real life, is actually, we're not actually been given the best information. And the reason why I say this is because if you look around, how many hardworking people do you know that are not successful? There's a lot of hardworking people who are still struggling. And the reason for this is because a lot of them don't know components or the full equation of being successful. And what they probably know is just hard work is the thing to do. And although it is a part of what you need to do, there's certain components that need to also be addressed as well, okay? So we're going to address those other components later on. But what we are going to do today is we're just going to get you to unlearn a few things and maybe look at things in a new perspective. So the first thing you want to look at here is that hard work is something that you want to kind of unlearn by itself. So don't just think of hard work as the solution, okay? Think of it as part of a solution, and the other parts are just not very obvious to most people, okay? Then we're going to look at the number one skill that all top students have, okay? The number one skill. So top students have they're very skilled at doing something. Okay, we're going to look at what that skill is, and then we're going to go into that in a bit more detail. And number 2, we're going to look at a strategy, that the number one strategy that top students use. Now, I'm differentiating between skill and strategy because a skill is something that people are actually very good at. They've probably learned it, and it's something that they've kind of developed and they've fine-tuned, and they're very good at it. So we're going to talk about that and why it's important to develop this number one skill. And a strategy is something that people consistently implement to get the results. Okay, so these two, if you can start implementing these two right away, you will start to see a lot more success. In fact, when I talk to a lot of students, a lot of times they tell me that they have challenges with time management. They put in a lot of time and effort, they still don't get the results that they want. They find that they procrastinate a lot. They find that they lack motivation, as well as the fact that sometimes they just are confused in terms of what to do. So if you can follow the number one skill and the number one strategy that all top students use, you are going to get substantially better results. Okay, so this is very important that you pay attention to today. And then we're going to give you an exercise in terms of how you can actually implement these skills and strategies. So before I continue, I just wanted to make this very clear that everything is copyrighted, right? So it's not appropriate for you to reproduce, redistribute, or retransmit any of this information at all. And also, it's not you're not allowed to actually make unauthorized reproductions of this information. And if so, you could be subject to criminal lawsuits and liability and things like that. Okay, and then maybe some fines and things like that. Okay, I just have to do this because a lot of this stuff is intellectual property. You can use it, you can try it out, but you can't actually claim it as your own information. Okay, very important that you know that. Okay, so let's continue. So what is the number one skill of top students? So what I have found after teaching for probably 15 years and actually improving my own academic performance is that the top students, they're very good at doing this one thing really, really well. And basically is they have exceptional listening skills. Okay, exceptional listening skills. So let's talk about this. What are exceptional listening skills? Now, what I want to do here is actually want to explain to you if you do not develop your listening skills. So if you actually don't work on developing them, you'll probably have a lot of challenges, okay? So you'll probably spend more time doing your homework because you really didn't understand the directions. And I can't explain to you, I can't emphasize enough how many times I teach something and I spend so much time in the class explaining something, and I even allow for questions, and students still get the assignment or get the homework wrong. And it's probably because they're distracted, or they're just not paying attention, or they just don't have the adequate listening skills. So what ends up happening is they spend more time doing homework and they don't do well. Okay, so this is the next point, right? So they spend more time studying, and the reason for this is because they end up actually not understanding that not all information has the same amount of value. So what they do is they study unimportant material a lot. And some students will say, well, isn't everything important? And that's pretty much what we've been taught in most of our classes, that everything is important. The problem is that you want to understand here that some things are actually, understanding certain concepts are more valuable than understanding other concepts. And if you can understand some of the main key components, then the other stuff becomes easier to get. So if you can understand and just, realize that not all information is equally important, then that actually helps you. Because then what you can do is you can spend time really learning the key concepts and the key important pieces of information. And by doing that, you actually make your life much, much easier. Now, in order to do that, you have to have good listening skills. And again, most students are not taught how to have good listening skills. So what happens is they study unimportant material. Another effect of not developing your listening skills is that you'll probably get poor grades. Okay, and you might even get frustrated and upset because you might be saying to yourself, well, I've worked so hard and I'm still not doing well. And by the way, this happened to me when I was in school. Okay, I worked very hard, didn't do well. And a lot of it is because I just didn't have the listening skills required. I made more errors and mistakes as well. So you might be making a lot of errors and a lot of mistakes. And usually it's not because it's an intelligence problem. It's usually when people make errors and mistakes, it's not because they're dumb or they're not smart. It's because they actually haven't fully grasped what was required for them to do. And again, that boils down to not being able to listen well. And you may experience more frustration and disappointment because, again, you're putting time and effort and you're trying to do the best you can, but maybe you missed something in class or maybe you didn't understand something. And as a result, you didn't get the grades that you wanted to, which resulted in a lot of frustration and disappointment. Okay. And then lastly, school just seems harder and more difficult if you do not have good listening skills. Okay. Now, if you do become a good listener, everything actually starts to get a lot better for you. You spend less time doing homework and you spend less time studying, but your performance actually goes up. Okay, so less time with higher performance is a great deal. It's a really, really good deal. And it all can happen if you actually develop your listening skills. Okay, then you end up getting better grades and better transcripts. Okay, and then when you have better transcripts, what ends up happening is you have more opportunities, and it becomes easier to find the kind of work that you want. Why? Because when you have better transcripts, your employers or potential employers are going to think that you are actually someone who's going to be able to deliver and do a better job when and if they hire you. Okay, you'll learn to make less mistakes and errors at school, and when you make less errors and mistakes, what ends up happening is you start to enjoy school a little bit more, because it's just more fun when you get better grades, right? And less pressure when you make fewer mistakes, and actually learning becomes fun because you're not worried about making mistakes, because you know that you're actually going to do well. Okay, and again, it's all because you've been able to listen well. So you'll eliminate lots of frustration and disappointment, and you'll have better results in school. School will become easier and fun. And this is actually really important, because if you look at the students that actually do very well in school, they actually have this attitude that school is easier and more fun. And a lot of times we don't understand that. Well, they're doing well, so they must be naturally talented. That's why they're doing well in school. But the reality is that they're actually very, very good listeners. In fact, I had a friend of mine when I was in high school, and he wouldn't take any notes, and he wouldn't really do much in the classroom except listen. And there I was really writing down a lot of notes and trying to, write everything down. And that student, Jason Otterman, that was his name. And he ended up just beating me in every single exam and every single course. And I actually never really saw him write much down. He just listened really, really well. And that's really where I got this understanding from, that it doesn't really matter how hard you work, but if you haven't actually understood the directions, you haven't understood the concepts, the effort really isn't going to help you, because you're probably doing the wrong thing. Okay, you end up making better friendships and relationships. So how can this happen? Well, it happens because you end up performing better. You end up understanding concepts, and then you kind of develop a reputation in the school for being somebody who's just smart. And when you end up being a student and you end up developing a relationship of being smart and doing well, then it's interesting how many people kind of want to hang out with you and spend time with you, and just kind of want to get closer to you because you're doing things that they really would like to do, but they're not able to do it. Okay, and then more people will begin to trust you as well. So there's a lot of benefits if you become a good listener. Okay, so very, very important that you understand that being a good listener can not just help you in school, but in also other areas of your life. Okay, so in just a quick summary, top students are not always the hardest workers. Okay, they are the smartest workers. It's very important you understand that. And top students are not always the hardest workers. They are the smartest workers. Okay, why? Because they know how to listen well. Okay, very important point here. So listening is critical. Now, how do you become a better listener? The best way to become a better listener is actually to make a commitment to improving in this area. Okay, so make a commitment and actually say to yourself, I actually want to become a better listener. Okay. Another way to do it is after you've committed to make an improvement in this area, make a promise to yourself that you're actually going to teach what you've learned. Now, this is very important, because if you make a commitment to teach what you've learned, then what'll happen is, as you're actually listening to the information, in your mind, you're like, well, I have to explain it to someone, and that actually will increase your level of focus and concentration while you're being taught this information, okay? And you can even teach it back to yourself. Like, one of the things that I did was I actually just listened to the material, after I listened to it, what I did was I actually wrote out the concepts again while I left the classroom. So I was not in class, and I wrote out the material, and I retaught myself what I learned. And if I couldn't explain it well, it just probably meant that, either I didn't understand it or I couldn't articulate it. So, but by knowing that I had to reteach it to myself, I was actually able to pay a lot more attention. And also teaching it to other people is very valuable as well. But the key component here is that before you start learning the material, you should make a commitment to actually practice teaching what you learn, either to yourself or somebody else, and that'll help you with your listening skills. Remove your distractions. Okay, so your smartphone is probably one of the biggest distractions when it comes to paying attention. Your technology can be a good thing, but a lot of students are not able to understand how to turn their technology into an advantage when they're in the classroom. So what happens is whenever there's a text or they have to, there's something pops up on their phone, they get distracted quickly, and then they actually miss out on key points that have been addressed in the class. Okay. And then what's worse is that the person doing the talking or the teaching, they may not say it, but it's kind of a rude thing to do when somebody's talking to you and you're looking somewhere else and you're not paying attention to them. And so what happens is, if this happens on a regular basis, the person who is actually teaching, which is probably your teacher, is probably not going to like it. And that's going to create some potential issues down the road if you actually don't fix this problem. Okay. Another thing that you also want to do is you want to summarize in your mind often what has been said. If you practice summarizing what has been said, that really will help you with paying more attention as well. Okay. Don't assume that you know what has been said. So ask questions regularly. Now, when I say ask questions, logically, a lot of people know that if they don't understand something, they should ask questions. But honestly, very few students ask questions. And the reason why they don't ask questions is because there's probably some fear around maybe sounding dumb or not, or wondering what other students might think if they ask a question that isn't that good and stuff like that. So what you want to do here is you just want to understand that if you have made a commitment to ask a question, okay, you are going to force yourself to become a better listener because you don't want to ask a dumb question. So if you can make this commitment to ask questions, okay, and really get clarification, what'll happen is, again, it'll force you to become a better listener as well, okay? And then again, get good at repeating back what you heard. So a lot of times, what can happen is if you've heard something by your teacher or something like that, and you repeat back what you heard, then it really clarifies again what has been taught to you, okay? And then lastly, pay a lot of attention to body language, okay? Now, what's really interesting is that over 90% of communication is nonverbal. So you actually have to listen for what is not being said. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because you've been taught how to become a better listener, and yes, definitely it's going to help you in school, okay? And in fact, what do I say? It's the number one strategy. But it can actually help you in other areas of your life. If you are a good listener, you will be amazed as to how much people will just want to spend time with you. And the reason for this is because a lot of times, very few people actually get heard and listened to. So once you do this, and once you learn the skill of being a good listener, your social life will actually get a lot better as well, because most people would want to be around someone who listens to them very well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this body language thing. Now, it's interesting because a lot of times students who don't know this, what they do is they come into the classroom and they're busy writing everything out and writing everything down that has been verbally said to them. But this is actually not something that I recommend. What I recommend you do is actually listen with your eyes more than your ears. And the reason for this is because a lot of communication is actually done non-verbally. So it's not the things that have been said. Okay, it's how things have been said, which is very, very important. So here's a very good analogy. It's a little bit funny, but it's a good analogy because I think it'll help you remember. So, and I'll just speak for myself, but when I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was, her and I were talking, and I was looking at her, and she just wasn't herself. And I asked her, I said, what's wrong? And she said to me, she goes, well, I'm fine. I'm fine. And yet everything else said she wasn't fine. And then when I say everything else, like she wasn't looking at me, she wasn't making good contact. Her eyes were a little bit, bloodshot, because I think maybe she had been crying. Maybe she didn't want to talk too much. And then all of a sudden she uses the word, I'm fine, right? So just that whole experience tells me that something is not fine. Yet at the same time, if I just listened to her words, I would have said, okay, everything's fine, and I would have walked away, right? So when people say certain things, it's not always what is accurate. Okay, so very important to understand that. Now, let's look at this diagram here, or this image. Okay, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So 38% of a message is actually what you hear, okay? But it's actually broken down into the tone, the clarity, and the verbal expressiveness. And then 55% is actually what you see or feel, right? So that's the facial expressions, the dressing, the grooming, the posture, eye contact, touches and gestures, and only 7% of the words. So what's interesting here is that students who work hard and they struggle, what happens is they actually focus on the 7%. Okay, they focus on what is being said, on the words. The students that actually do quite well and they understand what's valuable and what's not valuable, they're actually able to spend more time on the blue and the purple part, okay? Because they focus on how things are being said, more on what is being said. So when you are in class, what you really want to do is pay attention to the things that are not always the words, but the things that are actually non-verbal, okay? And, some of us who are getting taught this material online, you might say, well, that's hard because, you can't always see things and stuff. So I understand that. So what you want to do here is you really want to pay attention to things like how much time is spent on a subject. What's the tone of voice the instructor uses? The fact that the instructor actually creates a visual diagram for you to look at, is that important? Does the instructor actually say, hey, this thing that you're about to be taught is actually very important? Does the instructor actually take time to spend time really answering questions in detail? Okay, so these are all things that really exemplify if something is important or not. Okay, and that's critical, because once you are able to understand what's valuable and what's not, you actually will give yourself a much better chance to be successful at school. Plus, it'll also save you a lot of time and effort, and the grades will come much more easily. Okay, so we've talked about this we talked about this listening skill. So I think this hopefully will help you. Okay, and I've given you a lot of methods on how you can become a better listener. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to talk to you about a strategy. Okay, now this is not different from this is different from the skill, because the skill is something that you're consistently improving on and getting better and better at. I'm actually going to teach you a technique or strategy on how to dramatically improve your academic success. Okay, and this strategy is called speed of implementation. So basically, speed of implementation is starting a task as soon as possible. Okay, I'm not talking about finishing the task, I'm talking about starting the task. So if you can just practice starting a task as soon as possible, things will start to get amazingly better for you. Okay, so again, it's not about finishing it, it's really about starting it. Okay, and then another thing I think is very valuable, and that is procrastination increases our chances of failure. And one of the biggest issues a lot of hardworking students have is that they procrastinate a lot. Okay, and because of this procrastination problem, their chances of failure have gone up. And the reason is very obvious. It's because when they wait till the last minute, maybe they don't have enough time to complete it properly. Maybe they forget the directions. Maybe there's too much stress. Maybe the understanding of the assignment was not there to begin with, and now they don't have enough time to get clarification on it. And this happens a lot. Like a lot of times when I teach an assignment, the night before, people email me for the directions on how to do it, and they had a whole week to get the assignment done. And usually when that happens, I just tell them that go back to the class notes and just review the notes again, because for them to procrastinate to the last minute is not something I'm going to encourage. But if they ask me questions right away, then 100% I'm going to be there and answer those questions for them, because they're actually not procrastinating and they're actually applying speed of implementation. Okay, so top students know that they will feel better after they start their work. Okay, this is very important to understand. Top students know that they'll feel better after they start their work, and struggling students wait till they feel like it. Okay, now if you're somebody who just waits till you feel like doing stuff, there's a very good chance you're probably going to struggle not just in school, but in a lot of areas of your life. So what you want to do is you want to understand that don't wait to feel like it. You want to understand that you just do it and then you'll feel good after. Very important. Okay, so by applying speed of implementation, students have improved their grades by 30 to 40% in under 1 month. And I'm actually going to describe why this happens. Okay, but just by knowing this information, hopefully you'll start applying speed of implementation. Okay, and lastly, this has been tested and proven to work over the last 15 years. And, you know, consistently I talk to my students, and as soon as I teach them this material and I go back at the end of the class when it's finished, I ask them, I'm like, so what are some strategies that have really helped you out? And I can almost guarantee that the majority of the students will say speed of implementation was the one thing that helped them out. Okay, so let's look at why it's so effective. Okay, so let's look at what happens to people who do not apply speed of implementation. Okay, what ends up happening is they usually panic and they scramble for time at the last minute. Now, when this happens, they're stressed and we'll talk more about what stress does for you. But when they panic and they scramble for time, the stress gets to a point where it becomes very difficult for them to perform well. Okay, so that's one problem. Another one, actually I've kind of touched on it, is that stress and anxiety, they go up. And the key to understand this is that when stress and anxiety or any negative emotion is what you're experiencing, your ability to think clearly and effectively goes down. So think of it like an inverse relationship. The more negative the emotion, the more difficult it is to think clearly and effectively. If you do not apply speed of implementation, it actually reduces your enjoyment at school. And that is because you're always like worried and panicking and always thinking that, you never have enough time. When the reality is you actually have a lot more time than you think, but because you've waited to the last minute, it just feels like you don't have enough time to get stuff done. It decreases motivation because sometimes the stress and the anxiety gets so overwhelming that you just don't want to do it anymore. Okay, and you're demotivated. There's a good chance you might feel dumb or not intelligent, and it's because you're doing the work and it's just not at a high quality, so you don't get a good grade, and as a result of that, you don't feel like you're a very smart individual. Okay, and this is the thing that I think is very, very critical, is that people who do not apply speed of implementation and people who actually procrastinate, what happens is they actually get poor grades with much more effort. Okay, poor grades with much more effort. And then what they do is they keep doing it because in their mind, they're thinking the effort is the thing that they need to do. So as long as they put in lots and lots of effort, they should do better. And then when they realize that the effort doesn't translate to better grades, then more anxiety kicks in and they don't really feel, that they're smart and intelligent, and then their performance and their attitude about school actually decreases. Okay, so very important to understand this part. Now, if you do apply speed of implementation, you'll have way more free time than you think is possible. You'll have way more free time. And the reason for this is because you start to reduce the time it takes to get things done. And when you starting things right away, what happens is the directions and the way to complete the task is actually right, like at the top of your mind. So it becomes very easy to complete it. Okay. By applying speed of implementation, it actually eliminates your procrastination problem. And when you reduce your procrastination, your failure probability goes down and your success probability goes up. And not lastly, but one of the key components is that your stress and anxiety actually goes down. And remember what we talked about. When your stress, your anxiety, or any other negative emotion decreases, then your ability to think clearly and effectively increases. So natural result of decrease in stress and anxiety is better thinking. And then another one is it increases your performance levels with less effort. And again, the reason why this happens is because you're thinking more clearly, more effectively, and as a result of that, you end up doing much better with less effort because you don't have to actually kill yourself at the last minute. What you're doing here is you're just getting it done and you're starting it, and then what ends up happening is the results are much better, and you sometimes are surprised as to why you struggled in the past. I know a lot of students have come to me and they're like, I didn't realize school, university, or high school could be so easy. And I was like, yeah, it actually can be, but you need to be able to start things right away. Okay? And you actually begin to feel more confident and more smart. Why? Because now you're getting better results. And the reason you're getting better results is because you actually understand what needed to be done. And the reason why you understand what needed to be done is because you didn't waste time and you started it right away. Okay. And then lastly, you can see rapid progress. Okay, rapid progress. And, when you start seeing rapid progress with better results, that just motivates you to keep on going. So your motivation also goes up as well. Now, I'm teaching you this whole concept of speed of implementation only because this is one strategy that successful people use in all areas of life. Okay, in all areas of life. So if you ever look at people who are very successful, let's say in business, or successful people in sports, or successful people just in different areas of life, I can almost guarantee that these are the individuals who actually start the thing right away. And I've seen this in my life. Like, I have a lot of people who I know who struggle, and when you watch their work ethic, they work very hard, but they usually do it later. They don't actually get to it right away. And those people who actually do quite well, they actually start things very, very quickly. So I actually started applying things quickly, and I started applying speed of implementation. And honestly, it was very, very powerful for me. So I'm sharing this with you because I think it can really help you improve your performance levels. And like I said, your time management will get better, your motivation levels will get better, your overall quality of work will get better, your ability to understand concepts will increase, and the overall result will be much better, which will cause you to actually enjoy your overall experience being at school. So what I'd like you to do is actually try it out. Like, you've heard me talk about it, but what I'd like you to do now is take a week and actually try it out. Okay, so here's a good way to test it out for yourself. So what I would do is, and I've given you some examples here, but what I would do is I would say, okay, let's pick 10 events and let's apply speed of implementation to these 10 events. Okay, and then when you apply it, write down the result of actually applying it. Okay, so let's look at the first example. So I was given a math assignment today. So what is the result after applying speed of implementation? So maybe the result is that because you started it right away, you actually realized that the questions weren't that difficult. Okay, and then you got way more done than you thought you could. So maybe that's the result. And the result is the actual effect of starting right away. So then what did you learn and what did you feel after applying it? So maybe you learned that if you just start right away, things actually become much easier because the directions are quite clear in your mind. And if things are easier, maybe you felt more intelligent, maybe you felt more motivated, maybe you felt more confidence in your abilities because things didn't seem as difficult as you originally thought they would be. And then all of a sudden what you want to do is you want to look at your future behavior. So your future behavior might be that whenever you're given a math assignment, you're actually going to attempt to maybe read the directions and maybe attempt the questions that you know how to attempt right away. Maybe that's something you want to do for your behavior, okay? So hopefully this helps. And let's look at this next one here. I have a meeting tomorrow, so what did you do for the meeting? Well, what I did was I actually wrote down key points that I want to address at the meeting. So that was my speed of implementation. And what was the result of actually writing down those key points? Well, when I got to the meeting, it really was awesome because I was able to participate and contribute to the meeting and to the discussion. And as a result of that, I was able to get a lot of my thoughts out, and I was able to feel very heard, right? So I learned that by applying and preparing ahead of time for a meeting, I could easily communicate my ideas, I could participate, and I got a lot of respect from my the people in my team, because I was able to communicate very clearly and effectively of what I wanted to do. My new future behavior then will be to have my comments and have my ideas ready before the meeting, because that'll make the meeting go better, and eventually it'll allow the meeting to actually be best for everyone, because a lot of these key components are being addressed. Okay, so these are just some examples, but I'd like you to try them out for yourself. And just by applying speed of implementation, I think you'll have a lot more success at school and even outside of the classroom. Okay, so here's the summary for today. Summary is that we looked at the difference between hardworking students and the ones that actually do well. Okay, and what we learned was that it's not really how hard they work, and it's something that you want to actually let go of and unlearn. That hard work is necessary, but it's only part of an equation. Okay, and we also talked about the number one skill that top students have, and that is they have exceptional listening skills. And we talked about the fact that listening is 90% related to nonverbal communication. Okay, over 90% related to nonverbal. And the number one strategy is speed of implementation. So that's kind of what we talked about, and we understood the pros and cons of applying speed of implementation. And then I gave you a speed of implementation tracker, because I actually want you to test it out for yourself and see for yourself the results that you get when you apply speed of implementation. Okay, so that's it, and we'll see you for the next class. Have a good week. Bye-bye.